Hi, this is Simon Obstall and welcome to another tutorial for Apple Motion. And today we'll be taking a look at this dramatic particle-based effect. Now, hopefully you can see that this is actually a seamlessly looping particle scene, and that's what's most interesting about this project. So, anyway, let's make a start on it. So, first of all, project setup, 1920 1080, 24 frames a second, and a duration of 720 frames, or if you prefer, 30 seconds. So, the first thing we're going to do is grab the circle tool, hold down the shift key, and draw out a circle. Let's center it up for now. Let's come over to geometry, set its radius to 275, come back to properties, and for the Y position, let's have 100. So this is just going to be a rough guide for now as to where we want our main sort of sphere object to be. So I'm going to just knock back that opacity down to around 20%. And then I'm going to come over to the library and I'm going to scroll down to the content section. And here in the search bar, I'm going to type the word Spark. And I'm going to grab the spark called Spark05 and I'm going to bring it into this group here. It's not great. I'm sure we could come up with a better particle for this, but this is going to be a long tutorial anyway, so let's just crack on with this one. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come up to Object and make particles. So come over to the inspector. There's an awful lot to set up here. First of all, we're going to set the shape to circle, and the arrangement to random fill, and the radius to 70. We're going to turn on 3D. We're going to set the emission latitude to 90 and the other two values to 0. Birth rate, let's actually go for 50. This is just a temporary measure. Let's set the life to 8, the life randomness to 1, the speed to 150, and the speed randomness to 50. Let's set the angle randomness to 360, the spin randomness also to 360. Let's scroll down to the scale, set that to 50%, and set the scale randomness to 30%. So the net result of all that is it gives us this. You'll notice how these all look a bit smudgy against that circle, and the reason for that is we need to change the emitter's blend mode to add. And you can see suddenly they look like shining particles rather than smudgy dots. This is the most common error I ever see in visual effects. Even kind of fairly professional people, they simply forget that what you need to do with this sort of stuff is change the blend mode from normal to one of these other modes that is kind of adding rather than just simply using the alpha channel. You see how horrible that looks. Anyway, rant over. Switch to add, we're all good. So next I'm going to select project and come to object and new group. I'm going to grab the rectangle tool and just draw out any old rectangle, it doesn't really matter. Let's reset it. So this is going to be an object that's going to guide our particles around the sphere. So what we're going to do is first of all come to the position and add to the X, add parameter behavior, oscillate. And the defaults are fine there, so it's going to shuttle backwards and forwards like that. And then we're also going to add to the Y, add parameter behavior ramp, and we're going to have a start value of -200 and an end value of 275. This is just going to keep it doing the thing that we need it to do throughout the duration of the animation. So then we can come back to the emitter and we can add a behaviors simulation repel from, and let's add that rectangle as the source. So what we're going to do here is we're going to turn on Z, leave the other two enabled. We're going to set the strength down to 18 and let's reduce the influence down to 210. So what this is doing is kind of swirling the particles left and right like that, which with the cumulative effect of what we're subsequently going to do is going to create a really rather nice sort of wrapping around the sphere. But we've got a lot else to do before we can get there. The first thing we're going to do is come back to that emitter and we're going to come to behaviors and simulation and we're going to add gravity and we're going to set that gravity value to -75. That will help to pull the particles upwards despite what else is happening to them. And then we're going to duplicate that repel from. So right click duplicate. And what we need to do here is duplicate this rectangle. So right click duplicate. And let's turn off, or rather even delete, those two behaviors. So what we're going to do with this other rectangle is just move it up on Y to 100. And then we're going to come back down to our emitter. And for that second repel, the repel from copy, we're going to select that rectangle copy. In this case, we're going to turn off X and we're going to turn off Z. So it's only going to influence the Y. And we're going to turn the strength down to 4. And we're going to increase the influence up to 1000. So then we need to come to the group that encloses this emitter, and we need to come to the Y position, and we need to add parameter behavior ramp. So the values we want here are negative 600 for the start and 300 for the end. Now our circle that we used as a guide is getting influenced, of course, by this. So I'm going to drag it right up to the top here so it's not being influenced by that. And I'm just going to reset its Y position. Or rather, I'm going to set that Y position back to 100, which is where I want it to be. As I say, it's just a guide to allow us to see what's going on. And, you know, as I scrub through, hopefully you can see that those particles are now sort of getting pushed to left and right as they meet the edge of that circle. So there's a couple of extra behaviors I want to apply to our emitter. First of all, I'm going to come to its Y rotation. So add parameter behavior ramp. And I'm going to set this end value to 1800. And what this is going to do is it's kind of going to swirl the emitter around, and that's going to fly the particles off in a much more interesting fashion and give us a sense of sort of depth to the animation. And one final thing that I want to do is come back into the emitter. This radius here, first of all, I'm going to set it to 0, and then I'm going to apply add parameter behavior ramp. I'm going to set the start value to 70, which was our original value that we wanted, and the end value to 250. And I'm going to set the start offset to 240 and the end offset to 360. And what this is going to do is it's gradually going to expand the emitter, but basically it'll stop the particles reconverging after they've been repelled. So then I'm going to come back up to project, and I'm going to make another new group. I'm going to come over to the library. I'm going to look for generators. Let's clear that search item. And I'm going to look for caustics. And I'm going to drag it into this new group here. I'm going to come over to the inspector. So I want a size of 0.05. Speed is fine. And the refraction of 60. And brightness of 50. Then I'm going to come to filters and color. And I'm going to come down to threshold. And you can see that kind of takes away all the kind of softness of this caustics. I want to reduce that threshold value to 0.17 and the smoothness up to 0.2. So we're getting a little bit of that sort of feathering, but not too much. So then I'm going to take this enclosing group, and I'm going to come to filters and distortion, and I'm going to look for sphere. If you remember, our radius of our circle was 275, so let's go with that again. And we also want to set its Y position to be 100. So because we're going to be making a loop of this, I need to be able to loop these caustics. And the way we have to do that is to come to the caustics themselves, come to properties, Y position. We're going to add parameter behavior and ramp. And we're going to set the start value to -710 and the end value to 910. And so this is not looking right, and that's because we need to come to this group and we need to turn it to fixed resolution. And there you go. You can now see that our caustics rises up over the sphere, and then at the end it disappears. And this is the trick to creating loops, is you need to make sure that the start and end are kind of effectively hidden. So there's one more thing we need to add to this group. I'm going to turn off that group containing those rectangles because we're done with that now and we can close that up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this emitter and I'm going to right click and I'm going to duplicate, and I'm going to call this emitter smoke. I'm going to delete these two ramps. I'm going to leave the gravity, and that second repel from I'm also going to delete. So delete all of those, so we're left with the first repel from and also the gravity. So then I'm going to come back over to the library, scroll down until we find content. In the search bar, I'm going to type the word ink. And you'll see that down here, we've got ink expand 01. So I'm going to drag it into this group here, and I'm going to turn it off. So this smoke, let's select its particle cell and let's drag the ink expand into the particle cell for the smoke emitter. And you can see this sort of fluffy, puffy kind of thing. And this is going to create some pretty nice smoke once we're done with it. So let's come to the emitter. Let's set this radius here to be 300. I want to set the birth rate to be 25 and the birth rate randomness to be 20. I want to reduce the life down to 2 and have 0 life randomness. I want 0 speed, but a speed randomness of 10. I'm not interested in having any angle randomness or any spin randomness. And let's come back down to the scale and let's set both of those scale values to 100. So I'm going to come into the opacity over life, and I'm going to click here on the top bar to make an opacity keyframe, and then I'm going to set the opacity of that down to 0. So then I want to come over to properties. I want to set the Y position to 700. Also want to set the opacity down to 1%. So it can be really faint. You'll be surprised at how strong this actually is once we've actually composited the whole thing. So you're probably thinking it's all pretty weird and what the hell is going on here? There's just one final thing I need to do before I show you what's going on here, and that's to come into the emitter for the particles and come to the birth rate. Let's set that down to 0, and then let's add parameter behavior and a ramp. So I'm going to set that start value to, say, 250 for now. It really needs to come up to 750 for this to work, but it's easy enough to come back in again later on and fix that. So what we're going to do is have a start offset of 360 and an end offset of 200. And if we come to the end of our timeline, you'll see that the particles have now completely cleared. You'll also see that that caustic is completely cleared. Now I'm actually going to take that circle group and I'm going to drag it up above everything like that, so out of the way. And then I'm going to close down all these other groups. And then we need to do a bit more housekeeping. So I'm going to select these 3 groups here, not the one with the circle in it. And I'm going to right click and group. Let's close that down. And then I'm going to right click on this new group that I've made and I'm going to make clone layer. And then I'm going to take that clone layer and I'm going to drag it out into the group with the circle in it. And I'm going to delete this orphan group here. So then I'm going to rename this top group as result and this bottom group as source. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off this bottom group. We don't need to see that anymore. I'm actually going to come back to the first frame, and from this clone, what we're going to do is we're going to come to object and replicate. So the shape we want is line, and we want to zero out these positions here. And then what we want to do is we want to come down to the source frame offset. So if I open that out, you can see which one it is, this one here. I want to set that value to 72. And then I also want to come down on my timeline here and come to frame 72 and come to mark and mark play range out. And this is going to set the duration of our loop. I just want to point out that I have got my first frame set to be 1 in my preferences. So motion preferences and time. Frame numbering starts from 1. Make sure that's what is happening, otherwise my numbers are not going to make sense to you. And already you can see how this is working. We've got a much more complex scene than we had before. So a few other things we need to sort out here. First of all is that we're going to turn on additive blend, because as you probably noticed, we've got that sort of smudgy blending going on. And if we turn that on, you'll see everything looks dramatically better, because so I toggle that on and off, much more like they're sort of all being added together. It just looks so much better. And we're also going to take that replicator, come to its blend mode and set that to add. So it's being added over the top of that circle that we've created in the background there. And that helps as well. So the thing we need to do is to sort out the number of points. So obviously our source frame offset was the duration of the loop. That makes obvious sense. Now the number of points is going to depend on the length of that loop. So our total duration was 30 seconds, if you remember. Our loop is 72 frames, which is 3 seconds. So 30 divided by 3 is 10, and that's why we need 10 points for our value there. And that is going to create a perfect loop. Now the problem, of course, is that with these extra points, we've added a great deal of extra complexity that Motion is having to deal with, and we've lost all kind of real-time playback. So I'm just going to very quickly RAM preview that for you. And so that took about 45 seconds to render on this machine. And you'll notice we've got this. Unfortunately, because it's so huge, Motion is stopping at the end of the loop and is not playing the loop smoothly. And this is just something you're going to have to live with for the purposes of this tutorial. When you render this out as a GIF or GIF, depending on how you want to pronounce it, that loop will in fact be perfect. So that's the mechanics of the effect basically done. When we eventually come to render it, we're going to come back down into the group that contains the original emitter, and we're going to come in and we're going to look for that spark and that ramp behavior that we applied to that spark. What we're going to do is we're going to set that start value to 750. So it's going to generate a lot more particles. Obviously, I can't show you that here because I need to crack on with the tutorial and it's going to be far too slow. So just a couple of other things I want to do just to make it look a little bit nicer. I'm going to take this circle here and I'm going to increase its feather to something like 30. And you can see that's given us this little bit of a halo. I think I might just give it a little bit of color. And then I'm going to right click, duplicate, and come to properties and set its blend mode to linear dodge. And then come back in here and we're going to increase that feather to say 75. And that's kind of given us a bit more of an outside glow. And I think the only other thing I want to do is let's close everything up. I'm going to come over to the library. I'm going to look for generators. And I'm going to bring in a color solid, put it behind everything else. So that makes a new group. Let's darken this down a lot. Reduce its saturation first, darken it down a lot. And then for safety, I'm going to come up to this group here and I'm going to make sure that's set to linear dodge. You can see again that kind of brightens things up a little bit because we're making sure we're sort of adding that over our background. And I always like to kind of give the background a little bit of texture, even if it's very, very subtle, because it just kind of breaks things up a bit, makes it look a little bit better. So let's come over to the library. Let's scroll down to content. Let's click in the search bar and type the word grunge. And you'll see there's this built-in grunge texture. I'm going to bring it into this group here above the color solid. We just need to scale it up so it fits the frame. And then we need to change its blend mode to multiply. And if I just turn off that result group, hopefully you can see we've just got this nice little subtle texture in there that helps things. Turn this back on again. This is our final result. As I say, make sure to come back in and this group here, come back to the emitter, open it up, come to the spark, come to the ramp, set this value to 750. It's thinking a lot, but as you can see, that gives us a pretty spectacular show of sparks. And here's what we've done playing back. And you can see that that loop is working perfectly. It's probably all a little bit too intense, but I think I've probably shown you enough for now. It just needs a little bit of kind of grading, possibly pull back on the number of sparks, who knows. Really, I leave that up to you to play with. And just one final point to leave you with, do make sure to export only the play range when you're rendering this out, because that will create the loop, not the entire project. So anyway, hope that's been an interesting one. Thanks very much indeed for watching.